"Do this, in remembrance of me, until I return." The words were not shouted. They were not written in stone. They were spoken quietly, across a table, in the dim glow of oil lamps. A simple meal, bread, wine, 12 men, and their teacher. But hidden inside that moment was a message that would outlive empires, outlast kingdoms, and divide history itself. Because that night, Jesus Christ did something no one expected. He didn't speak of victory. He didn't speak of conquering Rome. He spoke of his own body being broken, his own blood being poured out, and then he gave a command. "Do this until I return." Not if I return, not symbolically, until. At that table, the disciples didn't understand. How could they? They had seen the miracles, the blind receiving sight, the dead raised back to life, storms silenced with a word. This was not a man who was supposed to die. This was the one they believed would change everything. And yet, he spoke as if the end had already been written. Outside that room, Jerusalem was alive. Thousands had gathered for Passover, a sacred remembrance of deliverance, a time when God rescued his people from slavery. But on this night, another deliverance was about to unfold, not from political oppression, but from something deeper, something unseen. What makes this moment so powerful is not just what was said, but when it was said. Because within hours, one of those men at the table would betray him, another would deny even knowing him, and the rest would scatter in fear. The teacher they trusted would be arrested, tried, condemned, and executed. And yet, he already knew. That's what makes these words different. "Do this until I return." They were not spoken in confusion. They were spoken with certainty, as if death itself was not the end of the story. For over 2,000 years, these words have been repeated in quiet churches, in crowded cathedrals, in hidden rooms, and open fields, across continents, across generations. Bread broken, wine poured, a ritual rooted in a moment, just before everything fell apart. But here's the question. Why would a man ask to be remembered before he even died? Why speak of his body as broken while he was still sitting at the table? And what did he mean? Until I return? Because what happened next was not just an execution, not just a tragedy, not just a story of betrayal and death. It was something far more unsettling, a sequence of events that would challenge reality itself. Is not just the story of Easter. This is the story of a plan, a betrayal foretold, a death that was expected, a tomb that was sealed, and a promise that refuses to stay in the past. Begins with a meal. Perfect. Now we go deep, slow, and cinematic. This chapter should feel like you're inside the room watching everything unfold in real time. Jerusalem was restless. The city had swollen beyond its limits. Pilgrims flooding in from every direction. Narrow streets filled with voices. Lamps burning late into the night. The scent of roasted lamb drifting through the air. It was Passover. A time to remember deliverance. A time to tell the story again. But in an upper room, away from the noise, another story was beginning. Jesus Christ entered the room with the 12. This was not unusual. They had shared meals like this before. Walked together. Laughed together. Traveled dusty roads side by side. But tonight, something felt different. There was a weight in the air. Unspoken. Unsettling. As if something invisible had already entered the room. They took their places around the table. Low cushions. Simple setting. Bread. Wine. Herbs. The elements of tradition. The symbols of a story every one of them knew by heart. The night God passed over his people in Egypt and led them out of bondage. Freedom remembered through a meal. But this time, the script would change. Jesus looked at them, not as a teacher addressing students, but as someone preparing to say goodbye. "I have eagerly desired to eat this Passover with you." The words were calm, but heavy, because desire like that comes when time is running out. Then something unexpected happened. He took the bread, gave thanks, and broke it. "This is my body, which is given for you." Pause. No one moved. No one spoke, because that was not part of the Passover. This meal was supposed to remember the past, but now he was speaking about himself. The disciples exchanged glances, confused, trying to understand, trying to fit his words into everything they thought they knew. Then he took the cup, raised it, and said, "This cup is the new covenant in my blood, which is poured out for you." Blood. Poured out? The room grew still, because now, the meaning was unavoidable. This wasn't symbolism pointing backward, it was pointing forward, to something that hadn't happened yet. And then came the command. Quiet, direct, unforgettable. "Do this in remembrance of me." Not of Moses, not of Egypt, of him. And then the part that would echo through history. "Until I return." Return? They didn't ask the question, but it hung in the air, because to return means to leave. And that made no sense. This was the one they believed would establish a kingdom. The one who spoke with authority no one could challenge. The one who calmed storms and raised the dead. How could he be talking about leaving? Then, without warning, he said it. "One of you will betray me." The words landed like a shockwave. 12 men, one table, and suddenly, trust shattered. "Surely not I?" One by one they asked, voices uncertain, eyes searching, each man questioning not just the others, but himself. Even in the presence of truth, doubt had entered the room, and somewhere in that silence sat the one who already knew, Judas. He had heard the same teachings, seen the same miracles, walked the same roads, and yet, something had shifted inside him. Jesus spoke again. "The hand of him who is going to betray me is with mine on the table." The table, the place of fellowship, of unity, now marked by betrayal. But here's what makes this moment even more unsettling. Jesus was not surprised. He wasn't reacting. He was revealing. The Son of Man will go, as it has been decreed. Decreed. This was not an accident, not a disruption, not a plan gone wrong. This was unfolding exactly as intended. The disciples didn't fully understand it. How could they? To them this was just a meal, turning strange, tension rising, questions multiplying. But in reality, this was the beginning of the end, or more accurately, the beginning of something far greater. Because at this table, Jesus redefined everything. The bread was no longer just bread. The cup, no longer just wine. They had become symbols of a coming sacrifice, a death that hadn't happened yet, but was already certain. And for over 2,000 years, people have returned to this moment, repeating the act, breaking the bread, sharing the cup, not fully present in that room, but connected to it, because of one command. "Do this in remembrance of me until I return." But the meal was not the end. It was only the beginning, because after the table came the garden. And in that garden, everything would begin to unravel. All right, now we shift tone. The meal was over. The words had been spoken, the bread broken, the cup shared. But the night was not finished. They left the room quietly. No crowds, no announcements, just a small group, walking through the narrow streets of Jerusalem. The city was still awake. Passover had filled every corner with life. But beyond the walls, away from the noise, there was a place, Garden of Gethsemane. A garden, familiar, quiet. A place Jesus Christ had gone to before. He entered and told his disciples, "Sit here while I go over there and pray." There was a shift in his voice. Not authority, not teaching, something heavier. He took a few of them further in, closer, and then he stopped. "My soul is overwhelmed with sorrow, to the point of death." This was new. They had seen him calm storms, confront leaders, speak without fear. But this was different. He wasn't standing strong before a crowd. He was alone, facing something unseen. "Stay here and keep watch with me." And then he went further, by himself, falling to the ground. He prayed, "Father, if it is possible, let this cup pass from me." The words hung in the darkness, raw, honest. For the first time, we see the weight of what is coming. Not just physical suffering, something deeper, something heavier than pain. Yet even in that moment, he added, "Not my will, but yours be done." Submission, not escape. He returned to the disciples. They were asleep, not watching, not praying, sleeping. "Could you not keep watch for 1 hour?" No anger, just disappointment. He went back again, prayed again, The same words, the same surrender. And again, he returned, still asleep. The moment was closing in, the quiet about to be broken. Then suddenly, footsteps, voices, light cutting through the darkness. A crowd approached, not a peaceful one. Torches, weapons, determination, and leading them was one of the 12, Judas. He knew this place, that's why he chose it. He walked ahead of the crowd, straight toward Jesus. No hesitation, no pause. Rabbi. And then, he kissed him, a sign of respect, turned into a signal of betrayal. Jesus looked at him, not with shock, not with anger, but with a question. Judas, are you betraying the Son of Man with a kiss? Even now, he gave him a chance to see it. But the moment had already passed. The soldiers stepped forward, hands reaching, grabbing, seizing him. The disciples reacted instantly. Confusion, fear, panic. One of them drew a sword, struck wildly, cutting off a servant's ear. Violence, meeting violence. But Jesus stopped it. No more of this. He touched the man, healed him. Even now, in the moment of his arrest, he was restoring. Then he turned to the crowd. Am I leading a rebellion? That you have come with swords and clubs? Day after day, he had been in the temple, teaching openly, unhidden. But they didn't come then. This is your hour, when darkness reigns. And just like that, the line had been crossed. The disciples fled. All of them. The ones who swore loyalty. The ones who said they would never leave. Gone. And Jesus stood alone, bound, taken, led away into the night. What began as a quiet prayer ended in chains. The betrayal was complete. The plan in motion. But what they didn't understand was that nothing here was out of control. This wasn't the triumph of his enemies. This was the beginning of something that had already been decided. Because the garden was only the first step. That would come the trial. The night had not ended. It had only changed form. Bound and surrounded, Jesus Christ was led away from the garden. No longer among friends. No longer in quiet prayer. No. He stood in the hands of his accusers. He was taken first to the house of the high priest, a place of authority, of judgment, of power. But this was no fair hearing, no careful examination of truth. This was a trial, already decided. Witnesses were called. Voices rose in accusation. Stories twisted. Words manipulated. But there was a problem. Their testimonies didn't agree. One said one thing. Another contradicted it. Even in their attempt to condemn him, they couldn't align the story. And through it all, he remained silent. No defense. No argument. No attempt to escape the outcome. Silence in the face of lies. Until finally, the high priest stood, demanding an answer. Tell us, are you the Messiah? The room held its breath. This was the question, the one everything rested on. Jesus answered, if I tell you, you will not believe. And if I ask you, you will not answer. Then he said something more, something that shifted everything. From now on, the Son of Man will be seated at the right hand of the power of God. That was enough, not because it was proven false, but because it was too dangerous to be true. Blasphemy. That was the charge. And in their eyes, it was all they needed. The verdict was sealed, not by evidence, but by rejection. They began to mock him, blindfolding him, striking him. Prophesy, they said. Who hit you? Laughter filled the room. Cruel, mocking. The one who spoke of truth, reduced to a spectacle. But there was a problem. They didn't have the authority to execute him. For that, they needed Rome. So as morning approached, they brought him to the Roman governor, Pontius Pilate. Pilate was not interested in religious disputes. He dealt in order, control, stability. What charges do you bring against this man? The accusations changed. Not blasphemy now. That wouldn't matter to Rome. Instead they said, he opposes Caesar. He claims to be a king. Now it was political, a threat to power. Pilate looked at Jesus, studied him. Are you the king of the Jews? Jesus replied, you have said so. Not denial. Not confirmation in the way they expected. Something deeper. Pilate turned back to the crowd. I find no basis for a charge against him. That should have been the end. But the crowd grew louder, more aggressive, more determined. He stirs up the people. He causes unrest. And unrest was something Rome could not tolerate. Pilate hesitated, because something was off. This man did not look like a rebel, did not speak like one, did not act like one. And yet, the pressure was building. So Pilate sent him to another ruler, Herod Antipas. Herod had heard of him, wanted to see him, not for justice, for curiosity. He had hoped for a miracle, a performance, something entertaining. But Jesus said nothing. No signs, no words, silence again. And silence frustrated power. Herod mocked him, dressed him in a robe, fake king, then sent him back to Pilate. Now the tension reached its peak. Pilate stood before the crowd. You brought me this man, and I have found no guilt in him. He tried to release him, but the crowd had made its choice. Crucify him. The word echoed, louder, stronger, unstoppable. Crucify him. Pilate tried again. What crime has he committed? But reason was gone. All that remained was demand. And then, another name was introduced. Barabbas. A known criminal, a rebel, a man guilty of violence. Pilate offered a choice. Who do you want me to release? Barabbas. The guilty, set free. The innocent, condemned. Pilate saw where this was going. Not justice, but pressure. Fear of unrest. Fear of losing control. So he made a decision. Not because it was right, but because it was easier. He washed his hands. A symbolic act. I am innocent of this man's blood. But history would remember differently. Because the order was given. And the sentence was final. Crucifixion. The trial was over. Not because truth had been found, but because truth had been rejected. And now, the path led only one place. To the cross. The sentence had been spoken. There would be no reversal. No appeal. No escape. Jesus Christ was handed over. Not just to be executed, but to be broken. The soldiers took him away. Stripped him. Mocked him. A robe placed on his shoulders. Not in honor, but in ridicule. Hail, King of the Jews. A crown was brought forward. Not of gold, but of thorns. Pressed down upon his head. They struck him. Spat on him. Laughed at him. The one they mocked as king. Said nothing. Then they led him out. Through the streets. Past the crowds. Some watched in silence. Some wept. Others shouted. The man who had healed the sick, raised the dead, spoken with authority, now carried a cross, step by step. The weight was more than wood. It was the weight of everything that had been set in motion. He stumbled, fell beneath it. A man from the crowd was forced forward to carry it behind him. And still, they walked out of the city to a place called Golgotha, the place of the skull. This was where it would end. The cross was laid down. They stretched out his hands. And then, nails, driven through flesh and wood, feet fixed in place. The cross lifted and dropped into the ground. He hung there, between earth and sky, between the guilty and the innocent. Two criminals beside him. One mocked, "If you are who you say you are, save yourself and us." The other saw something different. "Remember me when you come into your kingdom." And even there, even now, Jesus answered, "Today you will be with me in paradise." The crowd continued, mocking, shouting, "He saved others, but cannot save himself. If he is the Son of God, let him come down." But he did not come down, because this was not weakness, this was purpose. Hours passed. The sky grew dark, as if creation itself was reacting. And then, he spoke, "Father, forgive them, for they do not know what they are doing." Forgiveness, in the middle of execution. Time stretched, breath weakened, and then, a final cry. It is finished. Not, "I am finished," but, "It is finished." Something completed, something fulfilled. And then, he breathed his last. At that moment, everything shifted. The earth shook. The temple veil was torn. From top to bottom. A barrier removed. The separation ended. Even a Roman centurion, standing there, said, "Surely, this man was the Son of God." The crowd began to disperse, the noise fading into silence. What had seemed like victory felt different now. Something about this death was not ordinary, because this was not just an execution. This was a sacrifice, and though it looked like the end, it was only the beginning. The cross stood still. The crowd was gone. The voices had faded. Only a few remained, watching, waiting. The body of Jesus Christ hung lifeless. What had once moved, spoken, was now still. Time was running out. The Sabbath was approaching, and according to the law, everything had to be finished before it began. A man stepped forward, unexpected, unlikely. Joseph of Arimathea, a member of the council, a man of influence, but unlike the others, he had not agreed with what had been done. Quietly, he went to Pontius Pilate and asked for the body. Pilate was surprised. Already dead? He confirmed it with the centurion, and then granted the request. The body was taken down. No ceremony, no honor from the world, just careful hands, lifting what remained, the blood, the wounds, the weight of what had happened, wrapped in linen, prepared quickly, because time was almost gone. Nearby, there was a tomb, and used, carved into stone, a place where no one had ever been laid. They carried him there, step by step, placed him inside, not on a throne, but on a stone slab. Was where it ended, or so it seemed. A massive stone was rolled into place, sealing the entrance. Final. Close. The women who had followed him stood at a distance, watching, memorizing, where he was laid, because something in them was not finished. But for now, there was nothing more they could do. So they left. The Sabbath began, and with it, stillness. No movement, no voices, no miracles, just silence. For his followers, this was the end. The one they had trusted was gone. The one they believed in, buried. Every hope they carried, sealed behind a stone. But the story was not over, because the leaders remembered something. Not his miracles, not his teachings, his words. He said, "After 3 days, I will rise again." That was enough to concern them. So they went back to Pontius Pilate. Give the order to secure the tomb. Make it impossible. No interference. No deception. No disappearance. Pilate answered, "Take a guard, make it as secure as you know how." And they did. The stone was sealed. Guards were posted, watching, waiting. No one would enter. No one would leave. The tomb was now more than closed. It was secured. Everything had been done. The body was inside. The stone was in place. The guards were watching. Death had done its work, or so they believed, because beyond the silence, beyond the sealed stone, beyond the guarded entrance, something was coming. The Sabbath had passed. The stillness was over. Before the sun could rise, before the city could wake, a small group made their way through the darkness. The women, carrying spices, prepared to finish what had been started, not expecting a miracle, not expecting anything to change, only to honor the dead. Step by step, they approached the tomb, and one question followed them. Who will roll away the stone? Because they knew its weight. They had seen it sealed. They knew they could not move it. But when they arrived, something was wrong. Stone was already moved, not slightly, not disturbed, rolled away. The entrance open, the tomb exposed. They stopped. Confusion, fear, uncertainty. This was not what they expected. Slowly, they stepped forward and looked inside. The body was gone, not moved, not rearranged, gone. The linen cloths remained, but the one who had been wrapped in them was not there. Fear took hold, not understanding, not yet. Then suddenly, light. 2 figures standing before them, bright, unmistakable, and the women fell to the ground, terrified. Then came the words, "Why do you seek the living among the dead? He is not here." Another pause. "He has risen, risen." The word hung in the air, not symbolic, not poetic, literal, alive. Remember what he told you. How he said the Son of Man must be delivered, crucified, and on the 3rd day, rise again. And suddenly, they remembered the words, the warnings, the promise. It had all been said before, but now it was happening. The fear didn't disappear, but something else replaced it. Realization, possibility, hope, breaking through confusion. They ran back to the others, breathless, overwhelmed. The tomb is empty. He's not there. He has risen. But the response was not what they expected. The words sounded like nonsense, too impossible, too unbelievable. Grief does that. It makes hope feel like denial. But one of them ran. Peter the Apostle, running to the tomb. Not walking, not hesitating, running. He reached it, bent down, looked inside, and saw it. The linen cloths, folded, undisturbed, but no body. He stood there, trying to understand, trying to make sense of something that didn't make sense. Because graves don't open themselves, bodies don't disappear, and the dead do not rise. And yet, the tomb was empty, not broken into, not disturbed, empty. The stone was moved, the guards gone, the body missing. Every piece of evidence pointed to one thing. Something had happened, something no one expected, something no one could control. Because this was not theft, this was not human, this was resurrection. The same Jesus who had been buried was no longer in the grave. Death had been confronted, and something unthinkable had occurred. It did not win, but the story was not complete. An empty tomb is only the beginning of a question, because if he is not there, then where is he? The news spread quickly. The tomb was empty. The women ran to tell the disciples, but even their words sounded impossible. Some believed, some doubted, some laughed in disbelief. And then he appeared, not as a shadow, not as a ghost, but in flesh and bone, alive. Mary Magdalene first. She wept outside the tomb, thinking all was lost. "Woman, why are you crying?" She turned. Her teacher, the one she thought she had lost. "Rabboni," she whispered. "Teacher, alive." Then two disciples walking to Emmaus. They spoke of the events they had witnessed, their hearts heavy, confused. He came near, joined their walk, listened, explained. Every prophecy, every scripture, pointing to himself. And only when the bread was broken, their eyes were opened. It was him. Not a vision, not a dream. He was alive. The disciples themselves, huddled behind closed doors, fearful of what had happened. And he stood among them. "Peace be with you." He showed them his hands, his side, proof of what had been done and what had been overcome. Even Thomas, who doubted, was called. "Put your finger here. See my hands. Reach out and touch my side. Do not be unbelieving but believing." Thomas touched, and he fell to his knees. "My Lord and my God." Every appearance, a revelation. Every moment, a confirmation. Every doubt, confronted by presence. He ate with them, talked with them, explained the scriptures. He prepared them for the world they were about to face, for the mission they were about to carry. And then, he reminded them, "All authority in heaven and on earth has been given to me. Go, make disciples of all nations. Teach them to obey all that I have commanded you. And remember, I am with you always, even to the end of the age." The resurrection was no longer just an event. It was the foundation of a mission, a purpose, a hope. He was alive, and through him, they could be bold. They could speak. They could act. They could transform the world. Every encounter, every appearance, confirmed one truth. The grave did not hold him. Death had no claim. The promise was alive, and he was coming again. Before ascending, he gathered them one last time. Not with fear, not with uncertainty, but with purpose. "Go," he said, "into all the world. Proclaim the good news to all creation. Baptize them. Teach them everything I have commanded you." And then, the promise, "Remember, do this in remembrance of me, until I return." The command was simple, but profound. Every breaking of bread, every sharing of the cup, it became a reminder, a connection to him, a living thread from past to future. He promised power. "The Holy Spirit will come upon you, and you will receive strength to be my witnesses in Jerusalem and to the ends of the earth." And then, He lifted his hands, blessed them, and slowly ascended. They watched, eyes fixed, hearts pounding. The one who had walked among them, healed the sick, taught the truth, bore the sins of the world, was no longer visible, but the presence remained, and the promise echoed in their hearts. Until I return was a call, a mission, a hope. For centuries, generations, believers have repeated this act, breaking bread, pouring wine, not to recall a distant past, but to live in a promise, to declare faith, to anticipate his return. Because Easter is more than a day, more than a celebration. It is a reminder that death is not the end, darkness does not prevail, and hope is eternal. Do this, remember, live in it, until he returns.